Sunday morning, first snow of the year in Chicago, and we're on a little ruck. It's not that cold out though. It's not really sticking. So I've been thinking a lot about stories, not just like stories that you read in a book or see in a movie, but stories that create our reality, stories that really run our lives, all of us. Like, you might be asking yourself, what's a story? Well, you could be watching this video right now and telling yourself that I'm a crazy jagoff for rucking in the Sunday morning in the snow like this. That's a story in your head. It could be about how you feel about traffic. Oh, this is about traffic, how you feel like you should drive in traffic. That's a story you have. It could be about you and how you think you're supposed to show up in the world, and you're supposed to be this person, a grinder, a work hard, and disciplined. That's a story. It could be about somebody that works for you on your team. They're an A player. They're an all-star. That's a story. You could have the opposite story. Somebody's a piece of shit. Somebody's lazy. Whatever you want to say, right? They're stories. They're just things that are running in our head that are really creating our reality, or what our view of reality could be. They could be limiting, or they could be abundant. You could have really great stories, or you could have stories that are working against you. There's no good or bad in them. That's what makes up our lives. And so when you don't know that you have stories, you think that everything that you think is the truth. And so you really stick to it, right? Like when someone comes to you with an idea, but you're stuck on your idea, that's a story you have about that idea. And nobody really knows the 100% truth in this whole existing world that we have. That's what's the interesting part, right? And so when you have a story that limits you, you are actually limiting your idea of reality. So back to that first, one of those examples about an employee that I think is lazy. If I think that employee is lazy, and that's the story I'm telling myself, that is the only thing my brain will pick up, because that is the limit of that view. Now let me tell you a little story about this. The other day I got a call from a founder. He was really pissed off, right? And he was telling me that one of his employees over and over again is really consumed with the bonus that they should be getting, right? About their bonus, about their KPIs. And this person has a role in the company that is rising, and it hurts him a little bit because they're only thinking about themselves and not the real good of the company. But the first thing I asked him is, what's the story that you have going on in your head about people working just for money? And he was like, what do you mean? What's the story? And I'm like, no, just tell me, just talk it out to me. What does it mean when someone only wants to work for you because of the money? And we started going down, and he started explaining that he had this belief deep down underneath that story, that people that are only working for money don't really give a shit about the company. And so they're not great employees because they're not super loyal. And, in the very beginning of building your business, I think that's how it's going to be. You're going to have people that are die hard with you, ride or die. But as your business is growing 2, 3, 4, 5, 10, $20 million, let's be honest. Not everybody's going to come in there and be a ride or die for your company. Or maybe you did a shitty job of explaining the vision and mission and how their role plays a part in the company, so they don't really understand it. It could be that one too. And so I just started asking him questions to try to unpack the grip that he has on the story, because that's the important thing. There's nothing wrong with having a story, but having such a tight grip on it that that's the only way to live and that's the way things are, it just limits who you are as a person, more than just a business owner, as a person. And so we just sat down and we kept unpacking it. And once he started down-regulating his nervous system, once he wasn't so wrapped up in the story about the insult, right, about the emotions wrapped around it, we started looking at it more objectively, because he was able to. But when you have that grip on that story, like I said, that's the only worldview that you have in that moment. And then what we did is I go, okay, listen, why don't we start looking at her KPIs and her incentives, and maybe we'll see if they're a little bit skewed. They could have some improvement. And as soon as we did, sure enough, as soon as he was able to slow down, we were able to see that the problem wasn't this person. The problem is that their incentives were only set up on individual performance. And no wonder they were obsessed with individual performance. And so we're reworking the incentives, right? And that's one example of this. So in 2016, I was running and gunning, guys. I was, by all measures, successful on the outside, on paper. I was making more money than I ever had in my life. I had a lot of freedom in my businesses, but I was still pissed off and still a bit of a dick, And so I met this guy who taught me all this stuff about stories. His name is Mark England. And he started helping me unpack my stories. And what we did is if there was something on my mind, a story about my work, a story about my business, even a story about my life and my parents, we would just title it and write it all down. So for an example, like, who am I supposed to be as a boss, right? And I started just writing down this story. And what came out is that I really believe that people should be bosses like Gordon Gekko from the movie Wall Street in the 80s, right? Just hardcore takers and a dick. And then guess what? That was the story that was running in my background as a boss. So guess what kind of boss I was? A dick, right? And what I did is once I wrote that story down, I started just being able to look at it objectively. Because when these stories are in your head, they're absolute truths. There's no room for any sort of adjustment to them because you're gripping so tight to them, because your emotions are triggered by them. So if you could write it down and read it out loud, sometimes if you're like me, you would laugh at how ridiculous the things that you are saying. And when you write this down, you just write it down like you're talking normal, like what comes into your head. Like bosses should be, as a boss, I should be an entrepreneur. I should be a cutthroat motherfucker that takes what he wants when he wants. That's literally the sentence that I had to write because that was the truth. At least at that time, for me, that was my truth. And then I was able to write it, and then I was able to read it out loud. Then I slowed down my breath and read it again. And slowly but surely, that emotion that was really tied to it, that grip that I had on the story, was just able to release over time. And as I would read it, every time I read it, my emotions were less triggered. And then it was just a story. And it wasn't even my story at that point. And once you could get to that point, you could start rewriting your own stories, rewriting how you're looking at all this is in reality. And it's a really powerful exercise because I don't care what's going on in your business. Whatever is limiting your business is wrapped up in a story that you haven't faced yet. And the reason you haven't faced it yet is because it's in your head and you believe that it's the truth and your emotions are tied to it. But you could unwind this for yourself. You could do this. This is a very powerful tool. This is something that I've been doing with more founders. Honestly, guys, I'm creating a program for this to work with people on this because I see this tons and tons of times. I think I've done 35 planning sessions this quarter. And every single time, it's always the founders wrapped up in a story about who they should be and how they need to be looked at and how they need to approach people and all this stuff. And it's just limiting. It's limiting you. It's limiting your growth. It's limiting your life. Even in your relationships, who you should be as a father, who you should be as a mother, who you should be as a husband, who you should be as a son, whatever you are, boy or girl, you get the point. It's all a story. It's just a story and it's creating your reality. And if it's limiting your reality and not making it amazing, you need to get a grip on it. So just think about it. When you're driving in traffic, you have a story about how you should drive. You should have a story about other people in traffic. It's all a story. You're just making it up. And so if you could sit down and look at one of the things that's really driving you crazy and getting it out of your head and getting it on paper, titling that story and writing it out in conversational English, exactly how it comes out in your head. No one really needs to see this but you. And you could read it out loud. And then you could slow down your breath and read it again. And then you could read a sentence like, an entrepreneur should take what he wants when he wants, and take a big breath. And then read the next sentence. You're going to slow down your nervous system, which takes the grip off the story. And then once you don't have a grip on the story, you actually have an option to keep it or change it any way that you want and rewrite the story. Bosses should be in a state of giving, because giving helps you receive more. Something along those lines. And so I'd really encourage you guys to get out there today and try to become observant of your stories, because they're creating your peer view of the reality that you live in. And if anything is stopping you, it's literally because of your beliefs and the stories that you have in your head. Enjoy your day, guys. Enjoy this little snowfall that we're having here. First Sunday morning snowfall here in Chicago. Have a beautiful day. Bye-bye.